This is Linda from Sweet RA Decor, and today we're going to be making a wreath that's made for a barn in white and gray colors. This is a custom order that's actually going to be hanging in a real barn for one of my clients. So I started off with a white work form wreath. This is one that is a 15-inch wreath, and it's going to measure roughly 24 inches in diameter once this wreath is completed. Most of the supplies I got from Craft Outlet, including this is 21-inch mesh. This is a white fabric mesh. I was very happy with the quality of this product because it was sturdy, but it was also kind of soft and very nice to work with. And I think it led nicely to a bit of a rustic feel, especially because it's going to be hanging, in a barn. So I start off by unrolling the mesh, and then usually I'll gather it together and I'll drop the rest of the mesh on the floor so it doesn't tangle. So now I'll gather all that mesh together, gather it all together with the ends even in one hand. I like to zip tie the end of my mesh to the actual wreath form. That way it ensures that it's not going to move. Or if someone accidentally opens up one of those little white twist ties, nothing's going to fall out. It's going to stay in there. So I'll secure it with the twist tie, and then I'll snip off the edge. I like to snip it as close to there as possible. I don't want anything to be sharp or snagging on any of the mesh. So now I will gather that up at roughly about 8 inches, and I'll push that into I'll call these the tines, I guess, and twist it. And then I will go through and puff it up so it creates these puffs. And I'll do that again. So roughly 8 inches. And then again, I will push that into between the little work form twisties. And if it ends up being too puffy, you can always open those back up, and then you can pull it a little tighter or make it a little looser and then close them back up again. That's why I love these frames. It's very forgiving, very nice to use. Here I go now with the third one. So forms like these typically have 18 of these little twist ties. There's more on the outside ring than there are on the inside. And you'll see here, I'll take the mesh, put it in there, and twist it around. So I do that all around the inside. So I will speed it up a little bit so you don't have to watch the whole thing. If only my hands could work this fast in real life. Okay, so here now you see we're coming to the end of the inner circle. So I'll put the last one in the twist tie, puff it out, and then I don't snip the mesh. I simply start carrying it down to the level below that. So you can see I'll grab the mesh, and measure about 8 inches again. And then I'll push that in the twist tie that's a little bit further down, but a little bit to the left. I don't want it to go directly straight down. I want it to kind of move over a little bit. So it's kind of on a bit of a diagonal as you move down to the bottom ring. And then I'll continue this throughout the whole bottom ring. The same thing we did again. Sometimes you might want to be a little bit more than 8 inches, but these tines are typically spaced the same apart on the inside ring as they are on the outside ring, and that helps to keep your puffs uniform size. So I'll finish going around the rest of the wreath. And then here I'm slowing it down so you can see this is the last one and the last ring. I'm tucking it under the one where we first started coming down. So there's a bit of an overlap with one of the puffs, which is fine because we're adding some additional mesh ruffles so you won't see it. And also, if there's spaces or gaps, don't worry about that because our mesh ruffles are going to fill those in. So I'll take the end of the mesh, I'm going to snip it off nice and straight, and then I'm going to flip it over and then use another zip tie to secure the bottom of that to the back of the wreath. Again, some people don't use zip ties. They'll just keep it in the tine and flip it over, but I like to make sure everything is secure. And there we go. So here is what we call the base of the wreath. And from puffiest edges, it's about 24 inches. So now we're going to add in the mesh ruffles. I love this part. So I always like putting this in. It adds a little bit of extra to your wreath, and it also helps your ribbons lay nicer, I think. So we're going to cut these into strips. So this is 10-inch mesh. And I also got this from Craft Outlet. And I put it into my mesh roller. It's a holder. I got mine from Susie's Wreaths and Things, and I love mine. It is the best thing ever. So I'm going to take my rotary cutter, and I'm going to cut these at 18-inch strips. Now, it doesn't look like that on my mat because I'm coming at it from the longest side with the measurements instead of the shortest side, but these are 18 inches. And I need to cut 18 of these. So once I was done, I actually had mesh left on the roll. So that's why I want to make sure that I didn't cut too long of strips. That way I don't want to be shorted and then not have enough. So then I'm going to go back in and open up these little twisties and put in ruffles. So what I do is I flatten it out and then I curl the edges in about 2 times. So it's nice and curly, no frayed edges sticking out. And then I walk it up the center and pinch it real tight, and it makes this cute little bow tie shape. So I'll hold that shape and I will stick that in the open tines and twist it back closed again. And you can see it's adding a nice pop of color. It's filling in any gaps. That's why I love adding this. Yes, it costs a little bit more for some extra material, but in the end, it's absolutely worth it. If you're going to go through all this effort to make a wreath, you want to make sure that, you know what they say, don't be penny wise, dollar foolish. But you also do have to keep in mind the cost of your supplies, especially if you're making items that you resell. So I'll speed it up and I'll do this through the outside ring first, and then I will do it on the inside ring of the wreath until all 18 are placed. I find that going outside to inside will actually make your mess catch on itself a little bit less. Sometimes it can snag a little bit. Another variation you could do, instead of making the ruffles, as you can see as I roll it, you can actually roll it up to make a long tube, one long tube, and that makes, I think they call those curls. You can do actually 2 different types of mesh curls, and you can put, 2 different colors in each little mesh twist tie, and that's another way to add some variation of color if you want to bring more colors. So here comes the last ruffle. That's going in, and you can see how it really made the wreath get a lot fuller. There's still a lot of white, but it brought in a lot of the gray, so it's not really too much white with touches of gray. You see a lot of the gray in there, so that's why I decided to go with the white base, because I didn't want the gray to be too overpowering. Okay, so now here comes the fun part. It's ribbon time. I love this part. Picking out ribbons to match a wreath is my favorite part of all of this. It brings everything together, right? It's when your vision really starts becoming a reality and you can see how the different patterns are going to mix and match. And sometimes you might pick ribbons that you think are going to go great, and once you put them all together and take a look, you're like, nah, I'm not sure that's going to work. So don't be afraid to change your mind. Always go with the flow, follow your gut. So I'm going to make 14-inch ribbon ties. So I have this ribbon tie board from Hot Mesh Mom, and that is used to basically measure it out. You don't have to cut individual ties. You can just wrap it around there. Now here, I think I only had 3 or 4 on that one because I was finishing up an existing roll. So then I just slide the scissors in and out, cut it on each end, and then now I've got my individual ribbon ties. I like to dovetail them. So I'll take the ribbons and I will fold them in half toward each other so both of the wired ends are touching. And then I cut it on an angle from inside out. And I'll do that again, wire to wire, inside to out. And then you see it made a nice V shape. I should have probably shown it better there. But that gives it a really nice finished look all across your finished wreath, as well as doing that on the end of the ribbons too is something nice as well. So here we go with the second set of ribbon tails. See, I wrapped that around fully. It went around twice, but once you cut each end, then you end up with 4 ribbon tails. So for this one, I want 4 different ribbon patterns, and there are 18 of those twist ties. So I'm going to need 36 ribbons total. If I want 2 different patterns in each one, that means that there are 9 ribbons needed of each pattern in order to make this wreath. So I will speed up myself cutting the rest of these ribbons so you don't have to watch all of that. Another variation you can do on this is to have different ribbon widths. Now, I've used for this wreath, all 4 of my ribbon patterns are 2.5 inch, but you can also have some 1.5 inch in there. So you can pair up a 2.5 inch ribbon with a 1.5 inch ribbon. It doesn't really change the look of the wreath that much. You're still going to see all of your ribbons. It's still going to look full. I just happen to have the patterns that I wanted in that size. So then now we have all of the ribbon tails cut, and we can start placing them inside the wreath. So I've decided that I wanted to put the polka dot one with the striped one, and then the solid gray with the plaid pattern. So I have a darker gray with a lighter gray on each side. And I liked how that turned out. So what I'm going to do is take one of each pattern. I like to turn it on its side. It helps me grab it easier. And then I'm going to layer it, bend it in half. And then you can see where it bent. That's the center. You pinch it there. You open up your twists. Put it in there and pull it tight again. I like to twist it at least 1.5 ways around. And then I separate out these ribbons. So you want each of the ribbons to have movement on its own. You don't want them to overlap. Each ribbon tail part should be given its time to shine. So you see how that fans out, and it really makes 2 V shapes on top of each other. And then I will do that with the second pattern of ribbon. Again, one on top of the other with the ends meeting. Then pinching it up in the middle. Once you've done this a while, you'll be able to easily tell where the middle of it is. And then separating them out again. The ones that are on the bottom layer are more of a V on V. Once I go in to do the inner ribbons, you'll see I'll do more of an X pattern because that has to have a bit more coverage area. So I will speed up doing the rest of the ribbons on the outside layer. So it doesn't look that tiring, but once you've been standing up making a wreath for a while, it could be a little tiring, which is why it's kind of nice to be able to cut some of this and then walk away, take a break, come back. Usually when I do the videos, I'm standing up, but sometimes I will sit down on a stool just because I'm not as young as I used to be. So here I start on the inside. And then you can see it's more of an X shape where I'm having it out. They're still separated out, but I'm trying to have it cover more real estate and kind of poke more to the inside of the wreath because we want to make sure that these ribbon tails do cover more of the inside of the wreath as well. So you want full coverage. So then I'll do another pinch and pull that in there. And it's really nice. I think 14 inches is a nice length to do this at. Any longer and your tails start to overlap each other too much. You want to have a nice ratio between being able to see the mesh and having the ribbons on top of each other, but not too much ribbon. You don't want it too meshy or too ribbony. This gives you a nice mix of both. And there are some people who will put on their bow, who will put on some of their decorations first and then put in the ribbon tails to see where they need to go. I like to just put my tails on first. I think that way it helps me figure out better of where things are going to lay and how they're going to lay. And you'll see I'm twisting that one a little bit where it's more of a standing up X versus a side-to-side X. So you can twist those. Your X can go, whatever angle you want it to in order to give it the right coverage and not overlap too many of the other ribbons that are in there. So I think that might have been the last set of tails on the inside. There we go, fluffing it out, make sure it looks nice. I just really love how this all came together. The dark and the light gray, that looks just really nice. Loving this so much. Okay, moving on. Now we can get ready for my favorite part, is kind of eyeballing where we're going to put some of our designs. So this is the barn sign, and I wanted to put it up at the top so that the top of the barn doesn't get covered. So we're going to do the sign at the top, and we're going to do the bow down at the bottom. I love making the bows, my favorite part. So here I have my Easy Bow Maker. I love this tool so much. I don't have very good grip on my hands, so it's very hard for me to try to make a bow by hand. That's why having this tool is fantastic. Plus, if you have to walk away from it for a minute, you're not going to undo all the work you did by making your loops. If the kid's crying, she needs something, I can go and walk away from the bow, and it's not going to move from where I left it. So you saw I grabbed 2 chenille stems, and I also had a zip tie. Zip tie is optional. You can just use floral wire or a chenille stem to secure this. So I am starting out with a 4-inch ribbon. And then I'm going to put the ends together and dovetail it. So I didn't always use 4-inch ribbon, but the reason I like it is because it keeps your bow, first of all, it gives it a bit more of a, majestic quality. It's nice. It's something you don't see every day. It makes it look a bit more regal. And plus, it makes it not so floppy. If you have some of your 2.5-inch ribbons that are not really that thick of a material, it's not very, stiff or starchy, you don't want it to be too floppy. So having a 4-inch ribbon behind it will kind of help keep everything from, flopping backwards. So here I made an 18-inch tail. I put it through the wood dowels, and now I pinch and twist. Here is the key, pinching and twisting. So the back side of your ribbon should be facing up toward you on that loop that you're going to make. So you're looking at the butt side, the back side. So when you bring your ribbon over the top and put it in through the dowels, now your nice pretty side should be on the top. And it's hard to really tell that here with this ribbon because it's gray. There's no pattern on it. But you'll be able to see it in some loops that I do next. So this one came out to 7 inches. I like to have my 4.5-inch ribbon stick further out to 7 inches. Again, it gives it width, especially on a 24-inch wreath. And here I put it back in between the dowels again, measure it out to 7 inches, make sure that's good width. Push down, hold it with one hand then. And then I will pinch and twist and bring that down on the other side. I'm only doing 1 loop on either side for the 4.5-inch ribbon. If this were going to be on a Christmas tree or something, I may make 2 loops, but for this bow, I only need 1 loop on either side. And then I dovetail the ends again. And these measured out to, I believe, 18 inches when I was done. Okay, so we're done with our 4.5-inch ribbon. Now we're going to move on to the next of our 2.5-inch patterned ribbon. So what we're going to use is the gray and white striped. So I dovetail this. So then I'm going to measure here. I don't want it to go all the way down to the bottom. I want to leave a bit of a gap between there. So this should be about, the tail of this one could probably come about, 2 or 3 inches shorter than the tail of the one before it. So then I pinch and twist, and then you can see I have my nice little loop. This one's going to come in, it's going to be a 6-inch wide loop on either side. I like to come in roughly about 1 inch as I come in and make my loops, or sometimes even a 1/2 inch if I want it to be a little bit of a wider bow. Okay, so then here I feed it through the dowels again, pull it out to 6 inches, that looks good. And then I kind of push it down, hold it with my right hand. So I pinch it with the right hand, and then I will twist eventually. There we go. I'll pinch and twist the left side of the ribbon, so butt side up, and then pretty side facing me when the loop comes over. And that again goes out to 6 inches. And you want to play with your loops. Don't leave them sandwiched on top of each other. You want to play with your loops and move them to where you think they're going to be. So you see here, actually, instead of making a full loop, I just cut that end off at 6 inches and snipped it. The reason I did this is I don't want to have too many loops. That's going to make a bow that's a little too thick, too stiff, and then you don't get a lot of movement in it. You don't want to have too many loops in the bow because then it starts to look too stuffed. It looks like me trying to get into my jeans from 3 years ago. It's too tight. Stuff hangs out. Not pretty. All right, here comes the next ribbon. This, again, is the same darker gray that was the 4.5-inch ribbon, but this one has white polka dots on it. Really cute. So I'm going to dovetail this. And this tail will come in, and I'll have it just a little bit shorter than the one before. I'm also going to bring this in from the other side. So there we go. I've made this on, I think this one was about a 5.5-inch loop on that side. Pinch and twist, looking at the butt side of the pattern, and then looking at the pretty side of the pattern, facing up once I bring the loop over. I'm making another loop now, so this is the second loop on the right-hand side, and then I'm going to cut the end of this tail on the left and dovetail it. You don't always have to have the same amount of loops on either side of the bow. Just kind of feel with it. You know, it depends what it's going on. How many loops, how big you want your bow to be. Okay, and I'll move those loops around and adjust them so that the bow is laying pretty much close to what the final bow is going to look like. All right, here comes the plaid. I really love this pattern. It's such a nice ribbon. Dovetail it. If I don't dovetail it when I start the ribbon, sometimes I forget, and then I have to go search in my tails later, and I'll find one I forgot. So I like to do it as I go. Okay, and I think these ones came in at 5 inches. And this one, I only did one loop on either side. And then I'll cut that tail and dovetail it. And I usually like to then finish off my bows with a 1.5-inch ribbon on the top. Now, this is not a ribbon that I had actually included in the tails within the wreath, but it's complementary. It's basically the same exact tones. But having a 1.5-inch as your top layer of the bow, I think makes it look nice. It brings the visuality in a little bit, narrows it in, and there we go. I think this came in at 4.5-inch on either side. All right, and then I cut that tail, again, about 4.5 inches. Dovetail the end so I don't forget. I also like to collect all of my little trimmed edges and clean as I go. It's OCD. I can't help it. That's how I like to do things. All right, I take my zip tie, and I'm going to squish this bow down. I'm going to make it into a sandwich, right? It's a bow sandwich. It's like a Whopper. Have it your way. Okay, there we go. I'm pushing the zip tie down behind there. I hold it in place with my thumb as I bring around the back. And then I put my chenille stem on the back of the ribbon because that's going to secure it onto the wreath. And then I'll pull the zip tie closed. So I pull it, and then I kind of make sure, yeah, everything looks good. This is where I want it. And then I pull it tight. The tighter you can pull the zip tie, that means that it's going to make your loops puff out. And it gives a lot of life to it and a lot of movement, a little bit to it. And I like doing that. I never used to do that up until about 2 years ago. And it was a trick I learned from watching Damon at Deco Exchange. So here's the wood barn sign. I painted it and I already attached on the little zip tie cable mount holders. I attached those with E6000, and then I used hot glue around the edges to hold it in place until the E6000 dried. And then I feed a chenille stem pipe cleaner through each of the ends and then kind of twist it. A little tricky sometimes to get it through there, but it works. So I twist it and I hold it. So this sign is going to go up at the top of the wreath because look at that cute top on that sign. I love that sign. Got that off of Etsy, spray painted it white. So now I'm going to feed either end of the pipe cleaner through the area where I already have one of those twist ties. So it's already naturally pinched narrow in that area. And that's where I'm going to feed through, one on either side. And then I'll twist it to secure it down below there. I want to make sure I get the height of where I wanted that in place first. And you don't have to put it on very tight at first. You can put it loosely in either one. That way it lets you play around with the exact placement of it before you tighten everything down. So here I go, adding this one to the other side. Sometimes it's a little tricky to find where the natural hole or narrow part is to get that poke through there. So if you have to poke a pipe cleaner through the mesh, then you can do that too. It's a forgiving material. I wouldn't worry about that. It's more about making sure you get the placement where you want it to be and where you think it'll work best. So I tighten that one down, and now here is the third one. I'll get that in there. Sometimes it can be a little frustrating. Then there, that one will be tightened. And you can play with the placement of it. Do you want to move it over a little bit? You don't want to squish it down too much because then you'll start flattening your ribbons and your sign will be like indented into the wreath, and then the ribbons will kind of stick out from either side. You don't really want to do that. You want it to be on there, not have too many gaps, but not be too squished either. So then I adjust the placement of some of the other ribbons on the wreath. Make sure that that looks all good. Okay, I'm happy with that. I think we're looking good. And now we can add on the bow, the finishing touch, the crowning glory of any wreath. So again, like we did with the sign, we're going to use the pipe cleaner and we're going to stick that through the narrow parts of where those little twisties are already in the wreath. So I'm going to go make sure I can find my spots, kind of put my hand there, squish it in, and I'll leave it a little indentation so I can easily find it. And then I'll put either side of that pipe cleaner down in there, poking it through. And again, like with the sign, you don't want to make it too tight at first because you can adjust, you can move it up a little, scooch it down a little bit. You don't want it to overlap your sign too much. I think that's one of the most important things about when you're putting the items on your wreath is you don't want to make things look like they're hidden behind something else. Each item should be there. It should be pretty. And if it's overlapping something, it should look natural and not obstructive. So now I'm taking all the individual loops of that bow, kind of fluffing it out, giving it a little life and movement there. I know I keep saying that about movement, but I think that's one of the most important things I've learned in the last few years about making bows is make sure it's got the ability to breathe. You want to let it air itself out, I guess, with the different loops on your bow. Okay, and you can adjust it. I like to adjust the top layer of my bow, that 1.5 inch ribbon, to make sure that you can't really see the zip tie in there. Sometimes you can see it and the color pokes through. If you pinch your loops together, then you don't see it as much. And see, here we go. And once my customer gets this wreath, if those bottom tails are a little bit too short or too long, they can actually trim that. Here I'm already doing a little bit of a trim to make sure that they more evenly match each other. On the ends, it doesn't have to be exact, but I think that was a little bit too long. The client is going to be placing this inside a very large tobacco basket. She's going to hang this in, so doing one kind of last fluff, taking a look, making sure that everything lays correctly, that all the ends are propped out, that there's no wrinkles, nothing's folded over. It's kind of like checking your kid before they leave the house, you know. Did you comb your hair? Did you brush your teeth? Here, you got a spot in your face. Let me get some spit on my thumb and wipe that smudge off your cheek. And there, we're all finished. And there's how that bottom of that bow is going to lay. Very, very pretty. I'm very thrilled with how that turned out. And here it is, the finished wreath. I'm thrilled with how it turned out, and my client was too. It's always great to make them smile. If you like my channel, please subscribe or follow me on TikTok.